Hi, and welcome to RBP on JSB. I'm violinist Rachel Barton Pine, and today we're going to be discussing the third movement of Bach's Partita No. 1 in B minor, the Sarabande, and its variation called a double. By the way, if you want to hear a discussion of various topics that pertain to all of the Bach sonatas and partitas, please be sure to watch the overview episode. So, a sarabande, we think we know what that is because we're very familiar with the Sarabande from Bach's D minor partita. This one, of course. It's slow and sad, and the emphasis is always on the second beat. 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3. And let's check out a couple of the famous sarabandes from Bach's cello suites, played, of course, an octave and a fifth up. Indulging myself here. I love that music so much. But okay, moving on to another example. Another sarabande from the Bach cello suites. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2. Etc. And then the one from number 6. 1, 2. What is that? 2, 1, 2. If you look at the cycle of 6 multi-movement works written previous to Bach's Six Sonatas and Partitas for unaccompanied violin by Johann Paul Westhoff, every single one of them has a sarabande, and every single sarabande has emphases on the second beats. So that is what a sarabande is, right? Not quite. That is what a sarabande was in the High Baroque. But go back farther into the 17th century, and as we've already discussed in the conversations on the other movements of this particular partita, Partita No. 1 by Bach is very much paying homage to the 17th century. Well, in the 17th century, they had a very different dance called a sarabande. It's interesting how the dance evolved to the point of complete transformation and yet still retained the name. If you want to hear examples of early 17th century fast sarabandes, I actually have 2 of them on my album of English music called An English Fancy. Those movements are absolutely fast. Now, I wouldn't say that the sarabande of the B minor partita is fast, but it's definitely not lingering. It's more flowing, and it doesn't have emphases on the second beats. If you try to superimpose that, let's see. Wait a sec, there is no second beat. Clearly, it can't be a classic High Baroque sarabande. Measure 4, no second beat. Measure 6, no second beat. Wait a sec, we're looking at a totally different animal here. So I think if we try to play it with the same slow approach as the D minor sarabande, we're missing the mark. Haven't done this in a while. Pull anything off. You can make that effective, but I think it's more effective and more correct, if you will. But of course, being correct for its own sake is pointless if it's not enjoyable, but I think it's more enjoyable to play it at a more flowing tempo. So, at first, if you've been used to playing it really slow, and then you start to play it like that, it'll feel rushed and weird. But just give it a try, live with it for a few weeks, get used to it. it's very possible that the same thing might happen to you as what happened to me, which is once I got used to it, I couldn't feel it any other way, and I'll probably never go back. There are many things I changed my mind on over the years, but I'll probably never go back to playing it really slow because I just feel like it's not meant to be that way. But, of course, everybody's entitled to their own opinion. So actually, right where we left off, we're at measure 6, and measure 6 is a very important point that I need to make about hemiolas. There's a hemiola right at this cadence and at the final cadence. Interestingly enough, not at the midpoint cadence leading into measure 17. That one is clearly not a hemiola no matter which way you slice it, but the other two very clearly are. What is a hemiola? A hemiola is a typical thing that often happens in movements that are in 3, where a big 3 is superimposed on top of 2 little 3s. So the movement is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. A hemiola would be 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So we're beating by half notes instead of quarter notes. So instead of 1, 1, it's so basically, instead of the way you would bow it, of course, instead of hooking here, you would make sure you have this down bow and then a little up bow, because this isn't beat 1 anymore. It's just the and of beat 2, and another down bow for the big beat 3. And some of the ways you can tell that it's meant to be a hemiola are the fact that it has a strong chord on the third beat of that first measure, making that third beat more important. So maybe it's a big second beat, and then a less important downbeat, which is no longer a downbeat, and then of course the half note in the bottom voice. Looking at the bass line, also if you're playing music for treble melody with bass line, like a Corelli sonata, you can often find the hemiolas by looking at the cello part. So anyway, and the last measure is really obvious because you can see that there's an 8th note rest on the downbeat of 32. So he's saying there is no downbeat. And then of course the and like I said, the other cadence is just a regular 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 into the cadence. The harmonic scheme of this movement is very interesting because it's a B minor partita, which means that all of the dance movements are going to be in B minor. There are no contrasting keys for any of the movements, actually in any of the partitas for that matter. But instead of going along in minor for a while, we actually have a second measure already that's in major. So we start out but then it builds back up to this. So that's technically F sharp major, but it's really the 5 chord of the leading back to the B minor. So it's an unresolved harmony. But then a question. Then our F sharp major again. Going back to the B minor. Or a little side trip into D major. So I'm playing it too fast just because I'm talking through it for you. So you wouldn't want to do it too fast because there's too much going on. So something medium, not slow, not fast, medium. Paying very careful attention to all of those chords as they go along. So there's a really nice thing that happens in the second half. You start out with your B minor, A major, brief moment where the sun comes out of the clouds, ever so slightly. So it's tempting with those big 4-note chords to want to go to that downbeat. Right? It feels like big chord, big chord, big chord. You want it to be big. But if you think about it harmonically, it doesn't do that at all. It starts intense. Then it relaxes. Then it comes back to minor. And then you have your E minor cadence at 17. And then major key for real. And then back to minor. Here's an almost cadence, but it's not a hemiola. Because the bass line has nothing on the big beat 3, so it can't be a big beat 3. An unresolved chord. And then we have a sequence, a 2-bar by 2-bar. So, and then these are actually the same idea, except decorated. Then more. And then the question mark chord. Now when we continue on to our double, we don't want to take a big pause and make it seem like it's the start of a new movement, because it's really a continuation of the same movement. So you don't want it to be exactly metronomically entering either, but just make sure that the 1, 2, 3 is the same beat. So in other words, quarter note equals dotted quarter note. And that you take a little bit of time, but keep the music lingering in the air. Etc. So this double is exactly the same as the main movement. Harmonically, it follows precisely the same scheme. So the unresolved chords, the major key side trips, all of those things, the cadences, it's all present in the double. And it's useful to play maybe a couple of measures at a time back to back to see how that really lines up. So you'd want to start, some people like to play the doubles like entirely delicately. But that can get really old really fast. It's kind of too long of a movement to indulge in that, I think, and that you should really pay more attention to the harmony. So starting out a little more intense with the B minor, then your D major, then leading to your F sharp major 5 chord, etc. So I've been starting up bow in case you haven't noticed, and the reason for that is that I am doing separate bows. Seems like a lot of separate bows, but actually doesn't seem as annoyingly separate if you're going at this medium tempo that we already talked about. It seems like it's devoid of slurs if you're going really slow. And then you might want to add some. And in fact, when you're going a medium tempo, you still might want to add some, but wait and add them on the repeats. Hopefully extemporaneously, but if you're a little scared to do that, you can work them out in advance, but then you got to make sure you memorize them. So either way, you've got some work to do. But adding slurs as kind of the ornaments, the variation on the variation for the repeats is a fun thing to do. So the first time I might, the second time, and maybe something different. And the next time, there's no one right solution, so I might do different slurs, different days, whatever kind of spontaneously occurs to me as I'm, it's almost like an improvisation that you get to do if you want to take that approach. Anyhow, if you're not doing repeats, Or if you don't want to worry about slurs, then just do it separate bows like Bach wrote. And after all, we're not adding a bunch of slurs to other movements that he didn't write them for, like, I don't know, the double of the second movement. We don't add a bunch of slurs. Of course, it's a presto, but still, why are you going to think that this one has to have slurs when it in fact doesn't? So, what you do want to make sure about is which direction you're going and stuff like that. So I find that I really like to have down bow on that strong chord in measure 4, and then when I get to the hemiola in measure 6, I like to have a down bow so that my big beats can all be on down bows. So that means that logically, if I start up bow, it all comes out perfectly. See, now I'm down bow. Down, up, down, 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 down. And now I'm down bow for the second half, which does work. And then major key. And then stronger one. Whatever. Okay, so that's basically the idea. If you do start the second half down bow, though, your second ending all the way through is going to put you ending up bow. But nothing wrong with that, because after all, we're not da 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 young. It's really the downbeat, which is the final note, and then it's just ending elegantly. Let's see. Yeah, that's right. So actually it feels rather nice to end up bow rather than, but this, the music just goes into the air, and it actually feels quite lovely. Measure 32, by the way, the previous bar, there is a hemiola like 31-32, but it's not a 2-bar hemiola. It's one of those miniature ones where da-da-da-da-da-da is making a small 3, 1, 2, in terms of the triplets. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's not the 2-bar. So instead it's another good reason to be down bow here. So those are some of my thoughts about the B minor Sarabande and its double. Thanks for watching RBP on JSB. I'm Rachel Barton Pine.